So, yeah, I've been thinking about how new tools and new software work, different ways we can network or work together, the impact that might have on Agile, especially Scrum or Scrumban. And in my case, I'm looking at it from an architecture team point of view. But basically, we have additional tooling and additional connectivity. If we have better tooling, simple tooling, should we rethink the way we do certain things? And so the one I'm looking at today is really the Standup. So what I'm going to argue is in order to make it where people can be organized and not distracted and actually report what they need, what they're working on, and where their dependencies, I'm going to argue that we should take what was traditionally the Scrum stand-up and move it to Slack and use that same in-person time we were using for stand-ups for all the other things that have value. So what is the purpose of a stand-up? What will I do today? So in theory, what you do in a stand-up, and this is the daily quick meeting in theory, is what will I do today? What did I do yesterday? And what's in my way? And it is not supposed to be a status meeting. Like, we do not need your status. And yet, projects need status, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. You could argue, in a lot of cases, what's in my way is actually the most important thing, right? The whole point of having an Agile cycle is that you identify issues early and you fix them early while they're small. So that's the in my way thing. And then there's a bunch of other stuff we do in those meetings. And a lot of times that has to get parked near the end. But, you know, a lot of teams will tend to lose focus on what they need to answer in that meeting, or they'll do that so quickly they lower the value. In a lot of cases in these Agile processes where you're doing something quickly or iteratively, you have a lot of iterations, people forget why they're doing something, or certain pieces might lose value. So the question is, how do we offline or get all the information we need to and iterate quickly while not boring people to death or wasting their time? I would actually say today there are kind of two different versions of the stand-up. There's option A and option B, and then there's like what you really should be getting out of it called expose here. But let's look at option A and option B. So the standard for option A is, what am I working on today? What's in my way? And if it's anything else, we're going to put it in the post stand-up, right? We're going to pin it to the board, and we'll talk about it after the stand-up, which is usually the same meeting, but this way you're trying to time box the stand-up. The problem, though, is a lot of people end up with a backlog, right? Like a Jira backlog or a Azure DevOps backlog or something else, right? To make sure the team's actually on track, management or the team leads a lot of times want to do a backlog walkthrough. Are we on track? Are we actually working all the things we thought we were working? Because when I do this oral walkthrough of what I'm working on, it's hard to remember like what tasks those are tied to. Like, is this part of a bigger thing I'm working on, or what are you doing? And so in the option B, we would walk through the backlog and then we would still look at the blockers. Now, what we really want out of a stand-up is we need to expose some things. What is the out-of-team impact? What is the possible overlap between the workers, people on the team, right? People can be working on a couple things on the team, and in the tickets or wherever the tasking, it looks fine. But really, when we cover it, we're like, hey, there's some overlap here. We're either doing redundant work or we're doing conflicting work. And we want to find cross-team dependencies. So that's a version of extra team impact, right? So the high value thing is finding the blockers and finding where we have dependencies on other teams, figuring out if they're on track, and are we creating dependencies on our own team that we didn't expect. So the weakness of this whole approach is that it kind of turns into a status meeting, right? And a lot of times you'll break into problem solving, and that's because people naturally want to help the other people on their team, or they naturally want help. That totally breaks the flow of the meeting, right? And that's because the primary purpose of the meeting is to identify blockers and to see what people are working on. Or if you're in the option B, it's to see if you're working on tickets and are they going to get closed. Another weakness is when you tend to do this, after a while, people perceive a low value, and they'll start going from 5 days to 3 or 5 days to 2. And that means that we aren't getting the value out of it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't value to be derived, right? Like, there's actually work that needs to be done here, and we have problems to solve, and we need to know what's happening. So if the meeting has perceived value, it could be that we don't need the meeting, or it could be we're doing the wrong thing in the meeting. And because of this, meetings get dumbed down over time. I want to get out of here, man. We're going to get this thing done. I don't see the value, so it gets dumbed down. So those tend to be the weaknesses of this. So if we look at the weaknesses, like we look at what we do, right? I said what the stand-up thing was, like what we do today, option A or B. It turns out there's a bunch of other things that we need to do on the team. We need to communicate. And that's really what this is about, is communication, identifying what's going on, right? So the pre-stand-up, a lot of times part of the meeting tends to be a team management thing. Or it's some internal intelligence. Hey, did you know this is happening in the company and this might impact our project, right? So those two pre-stand-up items will get covered a couple times a week. And maybe we should account for that. And then there's the post-stand-up stuff. Things you put a pin in. During the meeting, you're like, well, we're going to talk about this, I did that. Oh, crap, we need to come back and talk about it. So there's the problem solving and the tasking for help. Who's going to help this person be successful because we're blocked or because they're behind? So you could argue, I would actually argue in a lot of cases, this stuff is actually the important part of the stand-up. And a super important part for inclusion, especially when people are working remote. So we've got a bunch of stuff on our plate, right? We've got what we do today, either option A or B, and we argue about those on every team I've ever been on. We've argued whether we should go through option A or option B, or whether we should alternate. I've seen it where we do 3 days a week of stand-ups and 2 days a week of backlog. But either way, we're going to be exposing cross-team dependencies, that kind of stuff. And then we're also going to be generally doing at least 1 day a week team intelligence, internal intelligence, and team management. Hey, has everybody entered their time? Blah, blah, blah. Not a status thing, but everybody's got to do these tasks. And then we've got the post-stand-up work, which is really derived by the main part of the meeting. So tomorrow, what I would say, and I've worked on a couple of teams where we've already done that, so tomorrow is today. On Slack, we should basically have a Slack channel for each team, and I'll show you this in a minute. And everybody every day should be like, these are the things I'm working on. And this is something that's hard to do in a stand-up, but if I were to tell you what I'm working on and there's tickets tied to it or work items or service requests, I should be able to just put that in my status and say, these are the tasks I'm working on today. And these are the milestones I expect to meet. I actually also like to know what meetings people are in. It may be that I want to go to that meeting too, or they're having a redundant meeting, or we had a meeting like that yesterday, or other people need to go. So I actually like to know what meetings. In stand-ups, it's a complete waste of time to tell your meetings because there's not enough detail to figure out what's happening there. And then the blockers, and then what I worked on yesterday, if it was unexpected work. I'm on an architecture team, 30% of our work is interrupts. So it wasn't in yesterday's, I'm going to work on this. I probably should call it out today so that my boss and other people know this came up. And then if what happened yesterday impacts other people on my team or other teams in unexpected ways, I would say you put that in Slack. So the traditional part of the stand-up with a little better information should go in Slack. And then the stand-up, and I'm not sure you need it 5 days a week anymore, but the stand-up should be, help me now. What are we doing for blockers? What's the team admin stuff that we need? Any corporate intelligence? Hey, this is what's happening in the division. This team's been reorged and it's going to change the way we're operating over there. And any problem solving, still time boxed. If it reaches out of the time box, then you got to schedule another meeting. The other stand-up version would be the backlog walkthrough. So I would keep the Slack channel to do what you traditionally do for a stand-up, and I would do the stand-up extras and the backlog grooming in the in-persons, and I might make it where those in-persons really don't happen every day. So here's what it looks like to me. Team stand-up. I got a Slack channel, or it's really hard in WebEx Teams, but you might be able to do this in Microsoft Teams. But in Slack, I would have a team stand-up channel, and everybody would put their meetings, their tasks, and their blockers every day. And then everybody else can look at that, right? They don't have to remember if they can't call in at that time. That's the other advantage of using Slack. Everybody can do this early in the morning, and everybody doesn't have to, if somebody misses a call, they didn't miss something important. And then on the calendar, I would argue, I'm going to pick Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, actually, because I don't think you need 5 days a week a lot of times. On Tuesdays and Thursday, I would go over the backlog and any corporate stuff. And then on Monday, because it's the beginning of the week, I might do something a little different. I probably wouldn't do the backlog. I might do what are our big rocks for the week, what are our big goals. But you really need to account for the fact we've got corporate stuff to do. We've got people backlog work to do. We've got goals to make sure that we're in alignment still for the week. I don't think that's necessarily obvious in stand-ups if you follow them to the letter. And then for Slack, I'd probably have a second channel, which is the team channel. So the team stand-up and the team channel should be separate. And I hope you can leverage Slack to have a better Agile process.